Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to make a few comments here in a moment. I have a colleague that I'd like to invite up just to make a few comments. I'd like to introduce you to Red Dog McDavid. He is a rep for a small online media group. I think this can play an important role in putting together the questions and answers that we need to have solved as citizens in Alberta, as farmers and businesses. His team aren't politicians, but they can be our voice in a world where media closes out these kinds of conversations. They are starting a series of news and programming initiatives that, as of today, are only government They are starting a series. They are starting a series of news and programming initiatives that are speaking to what the government rhetoric is in this country. And my comments and why I'm affirming and supporting groups like this standing up is because we need to have small media speaking into Albertans' hearts and minds, because there's a lot of filtration going on in this province about what the real issues are, and we're not actually talking about many of them in many places. And these are gentlemen that are actually activating a discussion for you, for the farming community, for the gun owners, and the different stakeholders that are in this province that desperately care about the undermining of this nation and how it's impacting Alberta. So Red Dog, come up and introduce yourself, have a word, and then I'll jump into this because we're on the live stream now, okay?
Thank you, everybody, for coming. That's great. Thank you, Grant. I'm going to read part of it because I forget as I'm going along. How many of you guys have received emails, gotten onto a chat board, made a phone call? Let's see hands. Anybody use a phone? Everybody. Awesome. You are the folks that can give the truth, the facts, and provide the direction. We need to start speaking to the people. We're hhgradio.com. We're almost ready to go. We're moving. We're doing shows here and there. We did an interview with Daryl Comic here a couple days ago. It went well. It was awesome. And we're doing Rob Smith here tomorrow afternoon. Let's ask one more question. How many of you have joined a Zoom or a Skype call in the past few years? Awesome. That's good. Raise your hand. Okay, so you've done that. Ones who, while happening, can share news and truth with us, that we and share can turn and share with the people of Alberta without interference from mainstream media. Mainstream media is not working for us. They're against us. They're preaching lies, and it's not happening. They're interfering with everything. Whether it's a farming issue, a freedom issue, or even a political redirection or refocus, let us be that voice to amplify yours. We deserve better than the mainstream media is doing for us. We don't promise to be perfect right out of the gate. We will get there very quickly, but if we can do this together, ask yourself why the mainstream media can't do it. Well, the answer is they can do it, but they won't. They were bought and paid for 10 or 15 years ago, and now they're paid to put on certain information, plain and simple. Truth, facts, evidence, and education. Charter a new course in the minds of Albertans without special interests or distraction. We're built and almost ready to be that voice. We've got radio, video, and we put our first newspaper out last August 1st. That went well in Leduc area, Edmonton. To be that voice that is needed to win this war, and we are at war, you know that. But we won't be doing this without you. The story can't be told without your involvement, your honesty, integrity, and financial support. We need financial support big time. We need to boost articles. We need to put stuff out, video and interviews out and stuff, and get it to everybody, like Max is doing. Max is doing a wonderful job putting stuff out. We need to reach the people, and we also you guys are traveling around, you see stuff, accidents, anything. Videotape it, send it in. We'll put it out there. You're at a town hall. Send in videotape. You see something happening, good conversation. Let's have it. Come in, do interviews with us. We'll put you out on the air and let people see you. We need to reach everybody. We have to get out there. We're not. We're all running around like chickens with our heads cut off. Nobody's doing one thing together. We need to come together. So I'm going to be traveling around Alberta the next little bit here, talking to people and putting these people together, and that's it. But financially, we need your help. And at the end of this, just come and talk to us as we go. We'll be taking breaks and stuff. Come see me, Kirk. Blaine's going to be here in a little bit, and or talk to Grant. We're here to help you guys. That's all I got to say. Thanks. Dr. Ruth? Talk truth. No.
They're on TV every day. Calgary. They interview people like you and get your name out there, and they can probably help you establish yourself.
Awesome.
They've gone through all of these.
We need to get rolling.
Good enough. Talk truth. I'll look it up. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, Red. I was very interested just this last week to see the interview with Daryl Comic. I'm not sure if that name means anything to any of you here in Central Alberta, but Daryl Comic is actually an individual that's running to be the president of the UCP board, and I'm going to probably come back and touch upon that. I would encourage you to watch that interview. You may not know why you want to watch that interview yet, but in case I forget to say this later, I'm going to be talking about this, and I want to encourage us to, if you're UCP members and you're going to the AGM, there's some really important membership voting that's required in terms of placing the board, because that's going to help to define the trajectory of the UCP going into 2027 and also the referendum, and those are big pieces. I want to get off. I have something I want to read from my phone. I kind of want to get into my conversation, so I'm going to just read you here something before I begin. I'll tell you a bit about myself in a few minutes if there are people here that haven't come across my name or what I've been doing in Canada in relation to outlining the issues that are actually coming at Canadian people and Albertans in terms of undermining our culture, values, and traditions, our way of life, and this great nation. And so as I have looked recently, it's almost daily that we're hearing new and shocking things if you are watching what's going on in this country. And in recent days, some of the things are hilarious, but they aren't hilarious. We have our guns seeking to be confiscated by a Tamil tiger. This individual is our Liberal minister that's working to gather up the guns across the country, and he's had to recuse himself from his ministerial position because of affiliations with the Tamil Tigers. The Tamil Tigers are a terrorist organization in Sri Lanka that were barbaric in relation to how they treated the Sinhalese people. Obviously, he's immigrated to this country. He has connections to his community back in Sri Lanka. But isn't it interesting that that is actually what is driving the agenda to confiscate law-abiding citizens' guns? We have a Supreme Court decision that is normalizing pedophilia, that has dropped the minimum sentence for people viewing child porn. And sometimes we say that, and we reflect on that judgment from the Supreme Court, and we think, isn't that terrible? It's just another little thing in the moral fabric of this nation being undermined. But I'm going to shock you. There's no children here today, so I'm just going to speak freely. The reality is that there are now predators out on the street looking for little kids that they can have adults have sex with so they can film it and film that porn. And that's the gruesome agenda behind the impact of that judgment. That's happened in the last 10 days. We have a Liberal minister putting biblical language or biblical verses within the shadow of hate speech. Whatever you think of the Bible, to begin to talk about a Christian text and putting it in the framework of our hate speech, which is about to be revised to something that they can't even define what hate means. It's a subjective analysis, which is going to completely tear at the fabric of the society that you cherish in your communities. We have our land titles being undermined. Land titles are being undermined directly by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I don't know if you understand or have followed the agenda that is really coming at Canada. Normally I start talking about Justin Trudeau's promise to Canada that we will be the first post-nation state. That's the agenda to see us disassociated from the culture, values, traditions, laws, and ethos that actually built our country. And if you think about or you talk to Canadians across this country, one of the repeated themes you'll hear Canadians asking is, where has our country gone, or where is it going? Because it's perpetually getting worse. And so now we have land title claims in British Columbia and New Brunswick that are upending people that have lived on the land and paid their mortgage, and banks are actually looking at their security for mortgages. Banks lend money to people to buy houses, and now all of a sudden we have courts in this country telling Canadians that our understanding of fee simple confidence in our land titles Torrens system is being undermined, and to please pay off their mortgage so the bank is no longer at risk. And so how do you sell a house when a bank will not advance a loan? So these are going to be pressure cookers coming at Canadians all over the country. This is a destabilizing impact in terms of the actual fabric of our nation. And it troubles me, and if you've ever heard me talk, I will continually challenge the fact that these things are being spoken about in our nation and being done in our nation, yet the party federally that is supposed to be representing us never actually interrogates or challenges any of these issues. And you'll hear me say, and I've said it probably now dozens of times, some of you may have heard me, when have you ever heard a Conservative MP or Conservative leader in the House of Commons saying to any Liberal leader, what is a post-nation state? Can you please tell us what that is? What does it mean that COVID is going to provide us with an opportunity for a reset? Can you tell us, Mr. Carney, what you mean by your discussion with Chrystia Freeland in the Liberal leadership race to tell us that we are going to be a part, safe and secure as Canadians, inside the New World Order? Can you tell us what the New World Order really means? Even though the Americans have now left it, Mr. Carney told us, if you heard that clip in the Liberal leadership race. Can you tell us why we have foreign interference in this country? Why we have an NSICOP, a National Security Intelligence Committee of parliamentarians who are actually telling Canadians that our democracy is under severe and sustained attack, that there's ample evidence of our democratic systems and political parties being undermined by foreign interference, and why we're not talking about it on a federal platform. We've actually been abandoned by the loyal opposition that is supposed to be contending for our interests, because the conversations are not happening. And so I ask that question quite safely because I know that those conversations and those questions haven't been asked. And so the country is waking up to these destabilizing events. And today we're here because all of this is crashing into Alberta in the wake of a Grey Cup outcome that has made it very clear that Mr. Carney has not implemented any of Danielle Smith's requests in terms of Alberta economic sovereignty. And we're at a crossroads in this country, and we have to recognize as well as being perhaps frustrated Albertans, we are in a country that is increasingly falling under the gaze of our massive neighbor, and we have a geopolitical issue, which I want to comment on here in a minute. I read a letter this morning that grieved me incredibly. It was from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Veterans Association in Nova Scotia, if you saw that. That was a very nice letter that was written to the community in Nova Scotia, inviting them out to a meeting today in an Anglican church where they were going to have a doctor, and their comment was, you should come out and listen. There's a lot to be on offer here. And they were inviting a doctor to come and present MAID as a solution to some of the challenges that people are facing and veterans from the RCMP are facing. And I just thought, we have a death cult being advanced with the promotional agenda of the RCMP and being offered euthanasia essentially inside a church. How messed up is our country? 300,000 civil servants are being trained to be able to enter into our military reserve. Why would we be doing that? Why would we be doing that? We have digital ID advancing. That is a digital cage. It's being advanced here provincially in Alberta too. And it's basically being advanced here for all of you with the promise that you can just trust the government and it's really not going to have any implications in terms of impacting your life. I disagree. We've lived for 100 years without digital ID. We don't need digital ID. It is the mechanism by which there will be ultimate control if it falls into the wrong hands. And those that can't see that and do not have the prudence of mind to perceive that should not be governing. We have some very interesting communications from the U.S. to reclassify Canada as a high-risk country that's being undermined by economic volatility and weak governance. That's a State Department notice that's been put out by the U.S. They're issuing a security warning about Canada. It was on the CPC. And I was doing some research this morning, and this is what I want to read from my phone. Imagine that an American government agency commenting to Canadian media about us being a security risk. They're warning Canadians about us, that there is the country is being destabilized because of economic volatility and weak government. Let me just read you these comments from the State Department. These were posted yesterday and within the last 12 hours. It's from the Department of State. Mass migration poses an existential threat to Western civilization and undermines the stability of key American allies. Today, the State Department instructed U.S. embassies to report on the human rights implications and public safety impacts of mass migration. U.S. officials, this is another post yesterday, U.S. officials will now scrutinize policies, government policies in Western nations that give leniency to migrant crime and human rights abuses, or that create two-tiered systems that prioritize migrants at the expense of their own citizens. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. The United States supports the sovereignty of our allies and calls on governments to constructively engage with the growing number of citizens concerned about mass migration. Listen to this. The United States stands ready to assist our allies in solving the global crisis of mass migration. Now, is that not a potent series of messages that could hardly be cloaked less than they are to our government and to what is going on in our nation, and actually to the citizenry of this country? Because I know from speaking with the American infrastructure that they're acutely concerned about continental security. And when I say hosting, regardless of what you may or may not think, what I'm talking about is the reality that the Americans believe that we have a very strong contingent of Chinese troops within our geographical boundaries. The Americans are concerned about Islamic terror cells, whether you believe that or not. And when you look at the agenda to take a Canadian gun culture and remove all of our guns, and then you start to connect the dots with the changes of allowing non-Canadians to enter into our military or to completely take all of our guns, you start to have to ask why things are going on the way that they are. And I know you're probably all here. I see a lot of nodding, and that's probably not really a shock to you, that question. But when you actually think about what I just read to you from the U.S. State Department, we actually have to stop and look at what it is that they're saying to us, because if I had taken any of you from 7 years ago, before COVID, just normal everyday Canadians, and I had read you this list, and I said to you, we're going to have digital ID, we're going to have a militarized civil service that are put in the Canadian Reserves, you're going to have your land titles made uncertain, you're going to have child pedophilia normalized in this country, you simply would have looked and said, hell no. There's no way that would ever happen in this country. If I'd asked you that after COVID, and this was a question that happened a lot in this country, people were saying, well, what are my actual red lines for when I say no to the tyranny of policy that's coming out of Ottawa in relation to what our government's doing? We would have named some of those things. Certainty of ownership of property and land titles would have been one of the red lines that we wouldn't have want to see crossed. And the normalization of pedophilia or the sexualization of our children. And I've looked and talked to now tens of thousands of Canadians across this country, and I've looked in their eyes whenever I talk about the fact that this is happening and that their children are vulnerable in the system to this. And when you bolt on the reality of Bill C-4, you may or may not know about this. This is the gender transitioning bill that will criminalize you if you try and stop your child from being pulled into the system to transition gender. You're facing 5 years in prison for doing that. You or your pastor or your counselor or whoever you choose to talk about that with the child if you try and stop them. And they call it transitioning. They don't, by the way, and this is hugely important because a lot of Canadians don't even understand this, that transition bill is not about the child transitioning from being heterosexual in their mind to being something else and then moving towards removing their genitalia and surgery or hormone blocking treatment. That bill has to do with the parent or counselors seeking to return them to a healthy disposition of mind so they don't undertake hormone blocking. That's what they're calling gender transition, and that's what they've made illegal, the parents trying to protect their kids. And I know when I have had these conversations and I see parents thinking about it or grandparents thinking about it, I can see their blood boiling because who of us would not stand in the gap to stop our children making an irreversible decision? I can't take my 16-year-old into the bar side of Boston Pizza because of the alcohol laws. But my government has made now a rule that I'll be criminally charged if I get in the way of him seeking to gender transition. That bill was put in place and implemented by the Conservative Party of Canada. December 1st, 2021, look it up. There's lots of challenges to that. People can hardly believe that it's true, but it is. So we are deviating from the actual value framework that built and designed this country. That's the root issue. So if you actually start to talk about and investigate why are these things happening, what is going on with all of these changes, you have to look at the things that have been told to us as Canadians. We've been told we will be the first post-nation state. We've been told COVID has provided us with an opportunity to reset this nation. We've been told that we shouldn't ask about foreign interference or why we have 11 MPs in this country that we're voting for that are the agents of foreign interference. Is that not shocking to you? We can't even have prayers at our Remembrance Day commemorations to honor those that gave us the freedom. And so we have now, from a federal perspective, as I see it, we have an agenda that's being, I guess, essentially played out to destroy your economic viability, your economic resiliency, the stability of your families, and ultimately our way of life and our futures. That's the stakes here as I see it. I always have a conversation and have questions at the end of the meetings, and so that I can have people ask questions and challenge me if they don't agree or have a question about what some of the things that I'm talking about. I invite you to do that and think about your questions. But that's what's happening federally, and the reason that it's accelerating to the degree that it is because the issues aren't being confronted by the loyal opposition. They just aren't. And all we hear about is more economic issues. But the truth is, when you look at the general election, and I'd ask you, because I'm guessing many of you voted for the federal Conservative Party in the general election, we need to analyze and look deeper at the root issue, even in the discussion about, elbows up and Orange Man bad. What was Trump saying to Canadians? He was saying, I'm going to put tariffs on Canada unless you sort out human trafficking and fentanyl production. That's what he said. And the Liberal response doesn't surprise me, or didn't surprise me at all, but I was very surprised when I heard Pierre Poilievre telling Canadians that the Conservative Party was going to advance an agenda for retaliatory tariffs as well. And they ran on that position across this country. Now, why would a Conservative Party or leadership not be wanting to confront or fix those issues? Do we want to see children trafficked or adults trafficked in this country? Are we okay with industrial scale fentanyl production? That's what Trump was asking us to do. It wasn't bacteria count of chicken that we were selling to the U.S. or the size of the size of the boards of lumber that we were selling. He was asking us to fix something that we in this room, I would expect everybody would want to fix. And we would have thought that a conservative leader in this country would have simply said, you're right, that's an issue. It's being run by organized crime. Let's define organized crime as the cartels that they are. Let's deem them to be terrorist organizations. And let's release the appropriate enforcement authority, including lethal force, to deconstruct the organized crime that's harming our people and offending our neighbors. We're bad neighbors. But we didn't do that. We had a discussion in this country about, and we all know this, there's enough age in this room to know that Canada cannot have a tariff war with the United States. That's foolishness. We exist together economically, and we have sailed off of their wind for my whole lifetime. And anybody that doesn't know that or doesn't understand that hasn't been thinking about economics or just, is completely naive. And yet the entire nation was fed that agenda at our general election. And the truth is here, it's a value discussion. We didn't confront those issues because we were afraid to tackle and engage organized crime in the country. We actually allowed Canadians and their businesses to be engaged with higher tariffs rather than confronting what it was President Trump was asking us to do. So are you surprised that the U.S. State Department is actually subtly releasing messages to the Canadian people to say that they are opposed to what's going on in the country in terms of mass migration, and that they will stand with and against these issues that are our concerns? Now, in America's case, they're looking at Canada and they're saying, you could be in a situation very quickly where you're destabilizing the continental security. And sometimes we think as Canadians, because we've never had a war on this land in generations that counts as any kind of kinetic confrontation. We just think that our discussion is about provincial politics and federal politics. And yet, Stephen Harper signed the Foreign Interference Protection Act that allowed Chinese troops to enter and be hosted in our nation. That was signed in order to protect national investment that was made in Canadian industry, and it allowed foreign troops in. But we don't know how many are here. I can get my mind around 200,000. The Americans believe it's 500,000. So what are we really doing in this country when we refuse to have any of these conversations at a federal political level? That's one question. It's not really the biggest question, because this is now 4 years away from another federal election. And if we continue to have attrition and drift going on inside the federal Conservative caucus, more floor crossers, more resignations, more people showing up and deciding not to vote. Do you know that in that, of course, I don't think the federal Conservatives wish to have an election, but if you had the gentleman that crossed the floor, the Edmonton MP who resigned and abstained, and the one person that had also abstained because of a health issue, they actually could have defeated the budget. Now that didn't happen, and I'm not surprised at why that's the case. But do you know that Elizabeth May's deal with Mark Carney for her vote, for the Green vote, was to ensure that Mark Carney would invoke and apply the UN Paris Climate Accord to the Canadian economy? Do you understand that the UN Paris Climate Accord restricts hydrocarbon production and distribution? So guess what was just agreed to be done on the strength of an $87 billion deficit? That's only the start. Deficit, that's just the budget deficit. What they end up with could be $387 billion. The country is becoming insolvent. And so then we come to this, and I'm guessing you all know this, so I hope I haven't depressed you. But then we come to this question, what is Alberta to do? Because there's a very strong impulse right now in this country, and myself as a Western Canadian, I've watched this. I was weaned on the Pierre Trudeau national energy crisis, listening to older folks, let's say now old folks talking about that, and they're bitter. There's still a simmering bitterness about that policy and how it impacted families and businesses and communities in this province. And for a long time, Alberta, while it's been paying the nearly $1 trillion since 1960, it's kind of not wanted to leave, even though it has resented the underrepresentation in government, even though it's been paying, because we love Canada. We actually love being Canadians. But it's been a bit like, and I use the analogy of like we've been balancing on the end of a little fishing boat, deciding whether we should get off, and we've never tipped and stepped off that boat because we love the nation and we love being Canadian, and so we've contributed. We're a benevolent and a kind people. I heard someone who recently moved from Nova Scotia commenting on Alberta. They have a talk show program. They were commenting on Alberta, and their analysis of why Alberta was leaving was because we are sick of paying and because we didn't like the electoral imbalance. Those things are true, but that's not really why we're leaving. We're leaving because our understanding of our government and what they're doing is incomprehensible to what we know as a people and what we love about this country. There's been a value departure from who we are, and that is the root system of what they're talking about when they say a post-national agenda or a reset. It's something that's unrecognizable, and you are becoming a cumbersome burden because you don't agree with a Marxist ideology. That's what's going on. And so this is coming now to Alberta, and what do we do about that? And I've been watching this discussion unfold provincially. I tend to stay out of the provincial political side of this. I think, and I am a UCP member provincially, I believe that we should not be splitting the Conservative vote provincially. We need to have the homogeneousness, if you will, and stay together to ensure that the principles and values that we love in this province are actually perpetuated and not undermined. But when I start to see that there's a desire within the party and the party's leadership to actually not talk about the referendum or separation or independence or whatever language you want to use at the AGM, I start to get concerned, because that's the most essential conversation that's going on right now. And for me, I'm sure there's going to be people here that will interrogate what I'm really saying. I hope you do, in terms of Alberta independence. I think we need to be having that conversation, because this just isn't about what's happening to us in this country. Is not just Eastern or Central Canadians disrespecting us and wanting us to pay for the disrespect. This is about a revolutionary change of the DNA of this nation. And they want you to pay for that while they discard you and what you hold precious. That is not political. That is societal change that usually comes with invading armies. This is what we're being confronted with now in this country. So Alberta isn't, for me, Alberta's not leaving. Alberta's standing up and saying we're not doing this anymore. If that means that we have to recognize that while we're tipping on the boat and we love being Canadians, we have to see that the federal government is drilling holes in the boat that we're tipping on. They're called post-nationalism. They're called a reset. They're called allowing us to be electing spies into our federal government. And that boat that we don't want to step off of and we pay to stay on is now being sunk while we're thinking about stepping off. And so for me, Alberta is the beachhead for freedom for this nation. But we need to step out of it so that we can actually salvage the rest of Canada. And so I have a vision. I believe that Alberta can do that, but we have to stabilize this province first. We have to look at the constitutional infrastructure that we're going to work under, and we need to establish the stability of this province and to protect our people so that we can do that. Then I think we can have conversations with the rest of Canada as its wheels are coming off when they've lost their line of credit. They'll be looking over the fence and saying, you know what, we need to look at what Alberta's doing. And so this is the opportunity for Albertans to actually begin to engage some of these issues. That's why I began this conversation today talking about this AGM that's coming up next weekend. I want to see someone come into that position that is actually going to advance the discussion for Albertans about independence, not neutralize it or subdue it or subvert it. Now, there's all kinds of good reasons that they think that we shouldn't be talking about it, but I think it's time that we really need to look at where we're at in this province and advance a strategy that can actually protect your grandchildren's future and your understanding of ownership and your ability to pass wealth and your livelihoods and your lifestyles and your ability to own guns and anything else that I can't think of right now that is being assaulted. So this is where we're at in this nation right now. I think this is where we're at in this province right now in terms of the discussions that are going on. And this is where I think Albertans need to have the conversations, because we should be one of the wealthiest places in the world. We really shouldn't be having any taxes, perhaps a consumer tax on new goods coming in. We shouldn't be having waiting lines in our hospitals. We shouldn't be worrying about simulated meat coming into our stores that's unidentified. We shouldn't be worrying about healthcare products that are toxic to our bodies and being prevented from buying things that are good for us. I mean, we shouldn't have 800% increase in stillborn deaths in this country because we're still vaccinating pregnant women. Where do you want me to stop? All those things are wrong, but we're really not engaging those discussions, and the excuses that are being offered for them are not good enough. And so I think we need to be looking very closely at what is said at this AGM. I've brought a list with me today. I won't call it a slate, but essentially it is a slate of people that I think are advancing the kind of discussion that we need in this province at the AGM. And if you're going, I'd invite you to take a picture on your phone so you can see who it is that I'm talking about. The starting point for me is Daryl Comic. And I think he's going to bring the kinds of leadership and conversations that the province requires. So there's a lot here that Ron has it up there. You can just take a picture of your phone. You'll see the names. You can do your research. The UCP, I think, does have a website where they have clips of the different candidates, and those are names of people from the different regions, as well as the main board members in terms of the VPs and the presidents. Few other things that I wanted to say. I am very interested, and usually I read this clip, but Stephen Harper made a speech in 2003. It was called the Civitas speech. And he basically commented to Canadians that he could see in 2003 this advancement of a deeply rooted moral hatred of the values that actually built Canada. So much so that every policy area that he was looking at was being attacked by what he called a deep-rooted kind of Marxist agenda that he was perceiving in 2003. And I found that quote. I have it within my book. I think it's at page 112. I'm not going to read it today. But he made the comment and noted that this was going on. He said the real conversation for conservatives in Canada are going to be about values. Now, he went into his administration. He never advanced any of the moral kind of value issues that the social conservative right would have liked to have seen advanced. But he was right in recognizing that the value issue is where we need to be engaging our discussion, because that is where we make the decision to say yes or no to things. And right now, we're drifting into a libertarian framework where there's just pragmatism. And we're not actually standing up for the values that define this country. So I see some Westminster brochures being passed around right now. I'm happy to answer some of those questions. I think the Westminster Act is a significant thing that we need to talk about in relation to the referendum and what that will mean in terms of how the referendum is voted on. But let me just pause here. I've talked for quite a few minutes and see if there's any questions in the room. We can pick up this conversation. And I do invite the toughest and the most mean-spirited questions, because our way of life as a nation is under assault. And we've been way too polite about stuff for way too long. And for me personally, I'm grieved at the loss of our nation. My uncles fought in World War II so that we could have this freedom. And we're losing the freedoms, absolutely losing the freedom and the country that those people fought for. So what are your questions? Anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask about? Separation, independence, comment.
I'm going to get phone to you just a second here. Just come. Yeah. Is it a question or statement under 20 seconds?
Basically, it's like you say, who's the biggest drug cartel we have in Canada? The government. So voting, we can't. Anyways, that's it.
Well, I mean, the drug issue, let's look at the drug issue again. And again, we have to look at our challenges in this nation and recognize that this just isn't about Alberta and Ottawa or the West and Central Canada. This is about what are the Americans saying, because the Americans are now evaluating that 85% of their fentanyl is coming from Canada. How long are they going to tolerate that when they're actually working across their southern border to remove cartel infrastructure? Or that they've got 10% of their Navy positioned off the coast of Venezuela to deal with Maduro because of it being the epicenter of international drug networks. How long do you think that we're going to allow ourselves to be, how long will they allow us to be an instabilizing piece of infrastructure at their northern border? We really need to think about these questions. Well, the comment, I'm not really sure what that comment was. Was it as soon as I'll maybe just leave it, I didn't hear it. Any other questions?
Yes, Grant. I'd like to know if the government of Quebec has renounced the Crown, cut all ties with the Crown. Why do we have 44 Liberals, 6 Conservatives, and 22 Bloc in the House of Commons of the Canadian government?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of good questions about how our country's actually holding together when you consider that in 1893, Queen Victoria was very intentional to ensure that the British North American Act had no succession plan. That was a very strong message, and yet the BNA Act as an application for our governance has continued. And I think constitutional thinkers need to be asking themselves why the British did that, and then followed up with the Westminster Act. Go ahead.
Okay, Grant, we've got a really serious problem, of course, with pornography. And it's ubiquitous. And you've got corporations based in Canada, like Pornhub. And what I'm trying to figure out is if the Supreme Court might have got it right on their ruling on minimum sentence.
Just let them adjust that, yeah.
I think the Supreme Court might have got it right on their ruling on not having mandatory minimum sentences for child porn viewing, because Pornhub isn't even checking all the stupid people that view it on whether or not they're sending out child porn to people. So that's what I want to ask you about is, did the Supreme Court possibly get this right? Because you're going to have people caught up in a dragnet they had no knowledge of.
What do you think is the greater scourge and evil to our country? The fact that people are looking at it, or the fact that there are people going out and isolating and grooming children and then forcing adult men to have sex with 3-year-old girls? I can easily tell you what I think and where I think the repugnancy on that is. It starts with the production of it. So I'm not really worried as a secondary low-hanging fruit about the people that may be entrapped because they're on Pornhub. The issue is that we're allowing it to be produced.
Oh, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we start there, don't we?
Yeah, but that's not what the ruling was it?
Well, tell me what you think the ruling was.
My understanding is the ruling was that you could have a mandatory minimum sentence for viewing child pornography. Correct?
Correct?
All right. That's all I'm saying.
So you think that it's better that we drop that because there might be people that were just looking at normal porn and got caught up in the web of looking at child porn?
Unbeknownst to them, because of the produced. Yeah.
Just trying to get concise, okay?
Unbeknownst to them, because of the fact that it's being produced by groups like Pornhub that aren't being discriminatory on who they're putting on their videos.
Yeah, so your solution is to police perversion rather than stop the production of it.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, help me with what you're saying. Because this is the kind of conversation, I hear these arguments, and they're very slippery slope arguments. I get that there might be people that might be legitimately on Pornhub that get caught up in some kind of sting operation looking at child porn. And that's what the Supreme Court's actually now done, is drop the sentencing. But the real effect of what is going on is that it's opening up the industry so that if people are users and are paying for child porn, that it's much more prevalent, much more available, and it's accessed. Do you not see that?
There's a lot of people that use those.
I think we need to get to the okay. If you have any questions,
You know,
just after this. Okay?
I'm
Thanks.
kind of giving you my answer, and Yeah, we are.
conversation here.
Yeah, we are. How many more, one more comment then, please.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that because pornography is ubiquitous, there's a lot of young men that are using pornography, they don't know what they're doing, and they're not paying for it either. But if their computer gets seized by the RCMP, they're going to jail, okay? Because Pornhub has put stuff on their computers that's child pornography.
Yeah, I think maybe we need a defense for a user that's going to be caught up in that, but to open the floodgates in terms of access to that is not a solution. I think we should be seeking to stop children being used to produce it. And I think that it's then those young men that you're suggesting may well be bumping into it aren't going to have the opportunity to bump into it. I think it's solving a problem that really isn't the problem. Might be an injustice there for sure, but not compared to my granddaughter being picked up on a street and raped and filmed.
That's right.
So let's just compare the moral indignation in terms of those two things. So any other questions?
December 11th, 1931.
Hold on, I'll get a microphone.
December 11th, 1931, what was put in place in Canada to give Canadians and each individual province/country freedom?
Well, the question relates to the Westminster Act. I'd encourage you to read it. The relevant section is Section 2. It makes it very clear that the British government separated itself from the sovereignty over Canada in relation to passing laws, and made it very clear that if any laws were passed in this country that interfaced incorrectly with formerly British laws, that the British law would not have application. And it went further and said that if there was disagreement provincially or federally, actually, that those governments could repeal or amend the legislation that was being offended by the British government. Now, that is a big mouthful, and if you read Section 2 of that legislation, I suggest that you probably need to read it about 20 times to get your head around it. But what it essentially meant was that the British pulled out and left the governance of this nation to the Canadians, and in Canada's particular case, gave the mandate equally to the federal government and to the provincial governments to determine what their legislative mandate was. Now, we know that in 1931, most of our relations were probably farming or fishing or cutting trees, and they weren't reading very complicated legislation from the United Kingdom. But that was a sea change in our political infrastructure, and it actually could have been the proper birthing of this nation if it had been articulated. What happened, though, was that there was a perpetuation of this notion of the Crown that is now playing out to us in a very negative way, because the Crown is being used as the authority to determine many of the discussions that we're bumping into right now in relation to legitimacy of government. This is a really big conversation. That piece of legislation was skipped. When you read the Westminster Act in the context of the fact that the Crown severed succession, which meant when Queen Victoria died, Canada could not pass to any other sovereign. So where did it go? And this is the question that I think our government's going to have to answer, and the government lawyers as well. So any other questions from the back? Any questions about perhaps the sovereignty discussion, or what I was saying about Alberta independence and what I mean by Alberta independence? One thing I'd really like to say, and I'll come to your question there, is that for me, Alberta independence does not mean that we're leaving and running away because we're greedy Albertans and we want to become the 51st state. It's because we're the beachhead for freedom and liberty for all Canadians in this country, but it starts in Alberta first.
Okay. I'd like to, because when I approach people with the Westminster Act, I'd like to know, Canada is a corporation. who is it owned by? The Crown? If the Crown owns the land or owns the corporation, and the provinces have been granted the land through the land of West, or the Act of Westminster, and who owns the Crown Corporation of Alberta?
Well, this is one of the challenges, and I think for today, I think this corporate sovereignty discussion, in terms of what you're really asking me, is such a complex, nuanced discussion that I'm not going to go into a full-throated answer on this issue here. I'm happy to talk about it, but this is the very challenge that we're dealing with in this nation, in terms of the disassociation of the actual sovereign people of this nation with a government that is claiming sovereignty, in my increasing view, more and more without the legitimacy to do it, which is why I just commented as much as I did on what it would probably appear to be incredibly boring British sovereign legal history. But that speaks exactly to the issue, because at that point, whenever Queen Victoria died, it actually vested. It had to vest somewhere. And when I say vest, the ownership of the land, the intention was to ensure that the Dominion of Canada did not transfer to the next, whoever the next royal was after Victoria. In law, lawyers hate uncertainty, so it had to go somewhere. And the 1931 legislation ultimately answered that question, but it was ignored until now.
I'd like to break in with a short announcement here. At the entrance where you came in, there are two tables. We have two containers there for donations, which will pay for this building today. And if there is any left over, we plan it to go to Grant. That's everything for me.
That's very kind. I would encourage you to be generous today, because I think this room was a big commitment for the people that booked it. And there's a lot of other stuff on in the province today, and I'm happy to say, and not embarrassed to say, there's a lot of other things going on, and I think that the numbers would have not warranted this bigger room, but there was faith displayed here, and I hope that you can find it in your hearts to reward that, because this is a sizable room with a hefty bill, and that I don't think there'll be any residue coming to me, but I do encourage you to give generously, okay? Are there any other questions?
Further to the Westminster Act, what would you recommend people ask Danielle Smith to do at the upcoming AGM on that information?
Well, if it's the beginning of the AGM, I think the conversation would be to change the agenda so that Albertans can actually have the conversation about what is going on, because it's a membership meeting that's interested in separation and independence, and I think that's fairly obvious. And I think the other question I suppose I would ask her if I got a chance is, are you considering the fact that Alberta's sovereignty is essentially being threatened, not by central Canadian overreach in the old way that we used to understand it, but in the way that it has now had a parasitic Marxist agenda bolted onto it that is actually stealing our very understanding of what we are as Western Canadians, Albertans, or Canadians. And one of the biggest challenges that I see in this country is that we're having all of our political discussions without actually identifying the axe that's hanging over our head in the I guess the metaphor of what they're saying is happening, which is this supranational, post-national agenda to have us ruled by UN mechanisms. That's what Agenda 2030 is. They like to kind of classify it as conspiracy theory. I'll tell you what, I bumped into the agenda being played out in detail in Canada with regard to Agenda 2030 when I was introduced to a group of 52 civil servants in British Columbia that are brought together every month. They're sitting working across 5 sectors of society: family, education, justice, health, and environment. And they're basically working to implement Agenda 2030 into municipal, provincial, and federal both ethos and law. And that is why we're seeing the changes happening in terms of things that would otherwise be ridiculous in terms of our understanding of how this nation works. When the lady that told me about it, she was a part of a community, and she was actually an elected councillor in a municipality in BC. And she started to tell me this, and she told me the name of this organization that's hosting this. When I did the kind of corporate searches and research on that corporation, I found out that approximately 95% of their donations in the year prior were from one donor that was the federal government. That donation was approximately $6 million paid for by the federal government. And they are basically a shadow committee working outside of parliamentary scrutiny to design and undermine how this country's unraveling. I find that shocking. I've written in my book, I actually sat down when I understood what was going on. I asked the lady one day, I said to her, do you realize that you're actually participating? In 10 years from now, people may look back at what you're actually doing and participating in. They may see it as being treasonous because you're actually as offensive in what you're doing as it would be to have a foreign army seek to undermine the stability of this nation and then take control. And when she thought about it, she had a real angst and she was fighting against it on the inside. But that whole machine was rolling, and she told me that was being advanced by Justin Trudeau personally. And it was all being done in BC outside of scrutiny of Parliament. And so I said to her, would you consider smuggling out some papers? They weren't allowed to take their notes out. And I said, some of your working notes, would you smuggle them out and let me read them? And she did that. And I read these notes, and it shocked me because they were talking about your worldview, your mindset, and how you have a locked-in perspective of understanding of wealth, prosperity, inheritance, ownership, these kinds of principles that we understand that follows hard work and building a life for your family and your grandchildren, and you pass that on, and there's a legacy, and that's what has built this nation, is people with visions and dreams that have built lives for themselves and then allowed that to grow and be passed on to their children and their grandchildren. That's what this country's about. That's what we fought for, and that's what we're going to fight for. So this document, when I read it, I sat down and I wrote what I call a thought paper on what I was reading. And when I actually wrote it out, because I couldn't believe how distorted and demented the actual psychology was behind what they were doing to Canadians. And I sent it around to a bunch of lawyers that I know and different people, some former Conservative MPs. And that document ended up with some members, Conservative members in Ottawa, as well as with the RCMP. And some of you have maybe heard this story, but when their response was almost incredibly excited, because when they read what it was that I was saying that was going on in this committee, they could see that it kind of corroborated some or aligned with some of the things that they were seeing happening in the country. And they said to me, we're so glad that you, because now we can understand to and I said, so that's great. I'm really glad that I've given you some evidence to do about it. There's a committee meeting every month in British Columbia with a budget of $6 million a year working to undermine the that you're sitting in and are paid to defend. And their answer was, well, it's just not politically pragmatic to engage this, quote. And I said, gentlemen, you should be standing in front of the House of Commons in your underwear, rolling around in front of the snow until the media shows up and actually listens to what you have to say. because there's really not that much difference between the assault upon the integrity of thought and value that is embedded in what our nation is about, as opposed to actually being attacked by a foreign military. It's just a subversion from within. It's exactly what's going on. That was an awkward conversation. The RCMP conversation was similar. They're in short, they due diligence. And at the end of the conversation, off the record, the RCMP officer said to me, and this meeting with the RCMP was in 2021, their response was essentially, Grant, if you had told us or sent us this document 5 years ago, which would be 2016, we would have thought you were crazy. If we'd read it 2 years ago, 2018, 19, say, we would have been very concerned, because we know that there's so much foreign interference going on in the country that we need to deal with it. But now we're so overrun with, in terms of threats to this, all we have time to do is to allocate this thought, this letter, this outline of what is going on to subvert our way of life as a philosophical paper. They could just, all they said was, it's a philosophical paper, we'll watch this, but there's so many other threats. And so there's a question at the back with this lady, where that got to. And again, I ask you, why haven't all of these things that I'm outlining been confronted by our federal opposition? Why aren't they being asked these questions? Foreign interference. Why isn't Pierre Poilievre asking about the 11 MPs that are the agents or under the influence of foreign governments that are running in our nation? Why can't we have a conversation about the tariff on canola openly, when we know that tariff's from China, and we're afraid to have the conversation because we won't deal with the foreign interference issues? And those are your MPs. So the Conservative Party is enabling the undermining of this nation by omission. The Liberals are advancing it, but there's no defense. Ma'am.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, first off, and I'll be praying for you. You is not easy. I'm an APP member, and I believe very strongly in their mandates. And I believe, too, when you mentioned earlier that we have to collaborate and become one entity, we need thousands and thousands of people to rally. This is about a revolution, you guys. We're not just fighting a government, we're fighting evil. I mean, if you look at all the things that Mr. Abraham just said, that's raw evil. I don't have an answer. I just know that when you get a government that's been trained under the WEF, Klaus Schwab, I don't know. I mean, I'm here to try and get answers just like the rest of you, but I'm trying not to be overwhelmed and discouraged.
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to be clear there just in relation to your comment, and thank you for it. I'm not opposed to the APP at all. I think the APP's done amazing work. I started watching Dr. Modry begin to explore this issue back in late 22 down in Avenida Food Market. And yes? Oh, down in Avenida Food Market. And at that point, when he started talking about how to actually reform our Constitution to fix these things. And since that time, of course, he's seen that there's no way that we can actually access our Constitution to fix it. And so now we are endeavoring to move towards a referendum, which I think is a completely plausible agenda to bring the population of Alberta to a place where they're thinking about these issues. The challenge is here, and this is, I think, it's not a criticism, it's just an analysis. The challenge is that when or if we move to a referendum question and it's decided and we actually vote, then we're into the Clarity Act and we're into kind of 10 traffic circles of issues that leads us to a negotiation which could take us 10 years. And I guess I'm asking the question, I'm asking it rhetorically, probably with an agenda, if I'm being honest. I'm saying while we work through that as good little Canadians, working through the Clarity Act and having all the struggles that we're going to have as governments are changing and people are getting elected or whatever, we have an accelerating agenda to undermine your civil liberties and your personal freedom. And the question is, which bus is one's gonna rescue us and the other one's gonna kill us, and which one is coming first? And so right now, I'd say this with respect: having this slow walked or having Albertans gaslit about the advancement of these real issues in the context of the post-national threat is not helping us. And I think when I hear the discussion, I think this is where we need to expand the discussion, is that there's a timeliness about this that is vitally important now. We don't have 10 years left to navel gaze as this advances. So when I see gaslighting or this issue not advancing because I'm watching the advancement of the acts that's going to kill this, actually ultimately kill Canada 1.0, I think Alberta needs to get its ducks in a row a lot quicker than waiting for that axe to fall. And that's why I use the metaphor. That's why I use the metaphor of, it may just be that we have to take our life raft called Alberta out of Canada 1.0 so that we can actually reforge a new nation called Canada 2.0. That's actually where I think the stakes are right now in the country. And I think this is a discussion that you know, in a sense, I don't hear that urgency with APP. And again, just as a comment on APP, I think that we have to recognize there's a lot of financial discussion about how much richer we'd be if we left, which is radically true, and it appeals to our baser sense. But the truth is that we're actually being forced and motivated to step out of Canada because of the assault upon our way of life, our values, our faith, our freedom. And we are not talking about that, because those are the things that actually have a compelling legal argument in the international courts if we actually have to make the argument someday that we're going to self-determine and create a legitimate government that has declared independence, made a declaration of independence, because we may never be let go or negotiated free. And this is the discussion that Alberta has to be thinking about. And right now, I'm missing the urgency. And I know I've seen you out at many meetings. There's no agitation here at all, other than as an Albertan Canadian, we're in peril. We need to move faster, and we need to be much more intentional. And so when I see a discussion not happening at our AGM, that's very concerning. And that's why we need to put Daryl Komick into the president's office of the AGM, of the UCP board. So I don't know. That's my view. Okay, question.
Yeah, I agree with, we need Alberta to stand up against all this stuff there. It seems like Canada's on like a train wreck, like you say, with all these things going on, and MPs, Ottawa, not doing anything about it, not listening to the people. Is there a way to, wake up the MPs and get them to listen to people? They seem to be just more or less concerned about, getting a vote, and rather than listening to what people are saying. And how can we wake up the MPs in Ottawa, or Conservatives, Liberals, or whatever that are representing us, are not listening?
Well, look, I suppose probably in some ways on this question, I'm an expert in this room. I can say this with respect because I've run in 2 federal elections in this province with your neighbors in central Alberta, one in Ponoka-Disbury and one in Battle River, Crowfoot. And when I would go into meetings, I would ask people, are you okay with 100% or 100% support for full-term abortion? People would say, no way. Absolutely not. I wouldn't vote for that. Do you want to stop equalization in this country, equalization payments coming from Alberta to support the lunacy of central Canada? No way, we need to stop it. Do you recognize that the UN Paris Climate Accord is actually killing our oil sector? no, I didn't know that, but now that I do, we need to get out from under that treaty. And I'd say, well, do you realize that Pierre Poilievre is 100% for abortion, that he's going to continue the equalization payment, and then he won't revoke the UN Paris Climate Accord? No, I guess we never thought about that. Are you going to vote for Pierre Poilievre? Yes. So, well, in that election, we had that's a great question. The question was, what other choice do we have? There's a bunch of people that have been in this country for years, and they just elected Elizabeth May, one MP who just decided the budget vote on her agenda. So why couldn't Alberta actually lose its blue zombie on a federal level and actually put someone in that's going to confront these issues? There is another choice. I ran in that election, so did this gentleman. One MP speaking the truth and confronting this and actually telling you the truth at the grassroots will change this country. But we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't feel the same way provincially about splitting the vote. I want to be clear about that. Okay, Karen.
I have a couple of comments, and one is if everybody here and can get their other people that are thinking the same, write an email to Danielle Smith just saying that you would like to see the independence on the agenda for the AGM because that can count. It can maybe move something. The other thing I would really like to share is that this is not our grandfather's country anymore. And we like the idea of being able to cheer and everything, but it's not the same country. So if you're feeling like we can't break this up, think about what Grant's saying. We are going towards a better Canada.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And you know what? The irony is that a lot of the immigrants that are coming to this country are coming to the Canada that are they think that it is that our grandparents built. And they're getting here and they're being disillusioned. So let's not think this is just only kind of the white folk in Canada getting frustrated, because there's a lot of immigrants that are coming here that, you know, maybe if they could might go back, or are frustrated too, because they don't like the value deterioration that we're exhibiting in this nation.
I'd like to thank you for the information on the establishment versus the grassroots people, and I would like to ask about solutions. Like, we're a group of people here, it looks like a big problem. What, if you could tell us, without telling us what to do, what solutions do you see that we can?
Yeah, I think all of these problems that we have in the country cannot begin to be solved unless we're having the full measure of the conversation about what the risks are, right? And I think that is what I'm advocating here. I'm suggesting, first of all, that we look deeper than just political narrative at the root issues, first thing. Second thing, we ask our leadership to be accountable to those values being applied honestly in relation to the politics or the policies that are coming out. I think that we ask those leaders to have the conversations with us that we need to have, because we're seriously concerned as a people about what's happening to our nation. And that question is the question that I think the Premier needs to answer too, about exactly why aren't we talking about this when there's yes, she can say there's a court decision about the question, there's a Clarity Act, all those things. But the bottom line is how then shall we live? And I've been listening very closely. I'm sure there's many smarter people in this room than me, but I have a very hard time actually beginning to understand whether Alberta independence means it's within a broken Canada 1.0 or whether it's us leaving. And clarity on those issues would be a very good thing. And right now, I think Albertans are struggling with actually knowing what side of the fence she's on. And I think that may well be why she doesn't want to have the conversation. And I think I feel quite comfortable answering that question because I've talked to a lot of Albertans because they ask me, what do you think? Is she a federalist or is she actually a separatist for this country? And I've been very gracious in my answers because I'm wanting to see where we end up. So globalists, yeah.
So you mentioned the APP is doing the slow roll on the question, but potentially the slow roll. What is your recommendation to accelerate it and to get it through faster without going through the slow roll?
Yeah, let me, if I said that, I want to clarify it. I think APP has done an amazing job because they've been hard at work. I know they've been hard at work since the autumn of 2022, okay? And maybe before that I just wasn't aware of. I don't think that they're slow rolling the issue because they got the question out, they've got the signatures, and it's in the courts. My comment about slow rolling was more to do with the energy that is coming from the provincial government's office in terms of this agenda, especially when we're seeing the 9 principles that were requested or plans or projects or outlines of issues that she wanted dealt with, she set out in March, not being responded to. I think that what I was saying with regard to APP as a contradistinction to what I'm talking about with the government, the provincial government, is that I think within the APP we have to have a fuller conversation about what happens if the referendum is 50% plus 1, but we enter into the Clarity Act while the post-national agenda is accelerating to the point that the referendum and its outcome becomes irrelevant. That's the concern. Because we tend to think that this Canada that we love is just going to continue, and Alberta may or may not stand up and fix the country or not fix the country or whatever it's going to do. But I think that when we talk about a post-national agenda, we're talking about the radical undermining of our very understanding of how this nation operates. And we will not be citizens with a vote. We will be workers that are essentially in a digital cage, if we can stand even to live here. And our children won't have a future, and you probably won't own anything. This is it. I'm quite sure, speaking to the grassroots in this province and across the country, that they won't be happy, and I'm quite sure that there's a lot more certitude about the preservation of this nation in the event that politics fail.
William Aberhart, former premier of the province, once said that if you have not suffered enough, it is your God-given right to suffer some more. And he was saying that during the Depression before he was elected in a majority government that shook the world. It appeared on the front pages of the New York Times, okay? The reason I'm bringing this up is if we aren't ready for a referendum with the Clarity Act and stuff like that, I mean, will the whole movement be shut down? Have we not suffered enough? We may not have suffered enough yet so that the whole thing will get shut down before it even starts.
Well, I mean, when you look at the advance of the legislation that's happening, Bill C-2, Bill C-8, C-9, you can start to see that people would be speaking to advance these issues if subjective definitions are used that are determined by let's say the government to perceive that the agenda is a threat to sovereignty, then you're well right. Maybe perhaps they do get shut down. And that's part of the concern because there's at least still the facade or veneer of the rule of law. And there's a careful calculation being played out between Ottawa and the rest of this country and Washington about about how actually insecure our nation is right now.
Just a follow-up question.
Yeah, earlier you made reference to some sort of a group in Ottawa. Was this the same thing that the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms brought up about an impact in something group unit in shaping our whole attitude towards things like mass migration and the COVID pandemic?
I'm not sure of the name that you're referring to. There is a
The impact, and I'll tell you what it is right away. The Impact and Innovation Unit.
Sure. I'm not familiar with that. The committee that I'm referring to in BC that's meeting with the 52 civil servants is not called that, and I haven't disclosed the name of that group. And the group in Ottawa that I was referring to is called the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, NSICOP. And if you look online, you can look at YouTube online, you'll see a report, a verbal report by the MP David McGuinty in about the spring of 2020, where he outlines the unbelievable threat to this country and his concerns about the risk to our democracy. The fact that we don't talk about it or haven't heard about it, or it's not being interrogated in Parliament in some way or another, or there's not a public demonstration about it, still baffles me. It's that damning.
Grant, what is the vetting process when you want to run for a political position? What is the vetting process for a politician in this country?
I don't think that there's any fixed criteria in terms of being able to enter. I can't speak for every party. I think that there's, in our case, if are you asking about? I don't actually know. I think when I went through the Conservative leadership process, they did a cred check. They asked for references. They asked for political experience. They asked a lot about your different views on policies to see if there was essential alignment. But I think that was it, and it was quite normal. I don't think there was there was no expectation of professional requirements. I don't think you were barred because of whatever education you had or didn't. So I'm not really sure what you're asking, but.
Sorry, the follow-up of why I'm asking that is because when you have, so Carney is a perfect example right now, and I think what the dissolvement of trust when it comes to all of the people that sit in this room, APP, or not APP, but Carney and Brookfield is a perfect, Okay. So the reason I ask is because when we've got a scenario that is out in the media, even mainstream's covering it, and we've got Brookfield, for example. So when you have these political people that are in roles that have friends, family, direct ties into corporate entities, why is this being allowed? Because there should be conflict of interest and more stringent kind of reviews of who is the money behind these people, and then because we know that that's what's going to dictate the policy that they put forth. So to hear that that's not something we're doing makes me feel like we have such an archaic system that substantial things need to change. That's why there's no accountability.
Well, actually, in this question in relation to Mark Carney is interesting because he was very strategic, I think, in terms of asset restructuring before he let himself run for the Liberal leadership race. I did hear Poilievre asking him about his assets, and he said that he had put it into a trust, and therefore it wasn't a conflict of interest. And I think we all know from federal government paperwork, I think, was it over 200 different corporations or interests that he had? I listened to that very carefully. If it had been me asking the question, I would have been asking him if it was an irrevocable trust, because an irrevocable trust means that you absolutely pass it to someone else and you have no mechanism to ensure that it's ever returned to you. Those questions weren't asked. And actually, when you look at, it's not very hard every day, there's more evidence. If you look at the news, of governmental decisions being made for taxpayers' money to be sent overseas for investments or the development of space programs. And it looks increasingly like, with that particular case, if I read it correctly this morning in the news, that Brookfield has a significant interest in the real estate that the European Space Department is located on in Europe, a 50% interest actually. So suddenly we have, it appears, a 500 million, I'm not sure, one of those two, investment into the European space program, but the landlord for the space program is Brookfield. So check it out, check your facts. I mean, those are the kinds of questions that make you wonder exactly what the policy decisions are. Same kinds of questions. Why are we continuing to vaccinate pregnant mothers? If we had an automobile industry in this country, or a train system, or an airline that had an 800% increase in failures, we wouldn't be driving in them, traveling on them, or anything else. And it would not be an excuse to say that someone consented by getting on the bus or plane or train. Yet we continue to allow young pregnant women or pregnant women to be vaccinated and having their babies lost. It's unbelievable to me. That's a value question, and it's not good enough to say we may have an impact on the supply of drugs to AHS, because if we stop one, they may stop all of them. Maybe we need to go shopping. Go ahead.
I have a comment. I've been thinking, I really don't like anything about politics, period. And I've been disillusioned about politicians and many other things for many years. Anyway, we talk about what can we do. And when I hear a politician say the word progressive, I know what he means is the slippery slide down to evil, period. That's what progressive means in our country. What it means is we're advancing to hell as fast as we can. And one of the things that I think of a lot when I get involved in something like this, in any kind of a political movement or any kind of philosophical idea of what should be changed and so on, as this emergency comes out into play, is in my Bible I read all the time where God judged the nation of Israel because they worshipped other gods. And what I've watched, I'm old enough now to see where we used to pray every day and, in church, in school, and with reading the Bible and praying before things was normal when I was a kid. And but I saw through the 60s, I saw the women's lib movement really take huge, giant steps forward, and I saw the
Get closer to your microphone, sir, please.
What did you say? I couldn't hear you. Oh yeah, get closer.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And can you move
I'm
to
sorry,
a question? Can you move to a question for us too?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to make a comment. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is that we are collapsing morally in this country. We need to repent as individuals.
Please get to the question, sir, please.
And I wasn't having a question. I started with saying I was making a comment, so that's it.
Well, look, I mean, there's a lot said there. Let me just say, this country was founded upon the supremacy of God and the rule of law. It's a foundational pillar value in this nation, and I go further when I comment on this in the country, and I'll say, look, that is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is a substantively Christian nation, and whatever you think about government and faith Our nation governmentally is founded upon the principles that emanate from the Christian faith. And the most important one for this conversation in our country is the one that emanates from freedom, which is ultimately the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, gives you the absolute freedom to reject an understanding of God. And that is the beginning of the conversation of our liberties. So if we sever that connection out, regardless of all the other stuff that you were talking about there, we do it at our peril, we end up in a moral vacuum, and everything becomes equivocated and a comparison without just being able to say, no, this is wrong. And now we're actually having debates about it in relation to pedophilia. And that's why they're trying to change the definition of pedophilia to minor attracted person, so that it just doesn't have the social stigma to it, the moral sanction. And we need the moral sanction because stuff like that is evil. And that's why in this book I take the time to actually walk through and explain we are in the battle for the soul of this nation. And we're actually dealing with not just bad policy, we're dealing with an evil agenda to undermine human freedom, dignity, the value of life. And this is what it comes down to. And that's why I think actually with respect to the APP, which I do respect, we need to start to talk about the deterioration of the values as being the trigger for driving us leaving, because we've had enough. And the money is just a good argument, and it's a great argument, and it's true. But it's how then shall we live, not how big do we want our wallets to live. And I think we're missing something in communicating internationally on what we're doing and with the rest of Canada. It's not about the money. We just can't abide what's coming down the pipeline to define our lives. That's the missing ingredient for our messaging. And maybe there's not a comfort within APP to talk about that, but people want to talk about faith, family, and freedom in a real sense, and not just in a flippant federal political conservative sense when they're actually undermining all three. But APP, I don't believe is, and I believe that's a big part of the heart behind the movement, and that's why I'm a supporter of it. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's this guy that's celebrating his 60th wedding anniversary. He's deeply in love with his wife the first time he saw her. She's the same with him. They're at the anniversary celebrating meal. He meets one of her estranged cousins, second removed, whatever. He can't stand her. He turns to his wife, he says, "We got to get divorced." Because of one out of 100. That's it. Can't do it. We got to be divorced. Alberta trying to separate. Aren't they? They're doing that. They want to say that to Canada. They have no idea how much they have in common with 95% of the populace across the country. The guy out there at Christmas Day hauling lobster out of the Bay of Fundy. The guy in the West Coast doing the crab traps. The guy in Steeltown, Hamilton, forging the steel. The miners in Sudbury hauling up the nickel. Why the hell do we want to divorce them and let Ottawa win and the wimps win, who are the socialists? It's very simple. We're going to do that, or we're going to do what my ancestors have done over here to build this country. In 1536, it'll be 500 years to forge this country that the idiots came over here and started to change. We're going to let that happen? We're going to let them divide the country? God called it the Dominion of Canada. He named it. He created the country. And we're going to let the other guy tear it apart? Are we?
I'd like to respond to that.
Fight! Get off your ducks, you wimps. Yeah. I lived in Ottawa when Levesque got in. I saw what happened in Quebec. Separatism.
Okay, let's go. Let's let Graham Abraham answer the question.
Exactly. But start making alliances across the country with the average Joe.
So, you know what? I agree. I believe that this country's supposed to be Thank you for your comment. I believe the country's supposed to be together from sea to sea. I absolutely do. This is not a conversation about the East versus West in the nation that we all grew up with. This is a conversation about a free people that's recognizing that our brothers and sisters in other parts of this country have been hijacked by an agenda that's actually going to undermine our way of life, and we're the last position to stand up. So this isn't about leaving, actually. It's about standing up so that we can actually consolidate strength, build resiliency, and allow the rest of Canadians to be liberated. So it's not about being cowards. It's about finding a peaceful way, and what I'm doing in this country, both communicating and what I've been doing federally, is to contend for a peaceful pathway that can have a solution found politically, with the hope that we can actually navigate this. But more and more, I'm seeing that those mechanisms aren't existing as any credible pathway unless it's going to come from Alberta. And that's why this is so important. And that's why I'm saying we need to actually go further and talk about these things. And you know what? There's, I'm going to say this and probably risk being misunderstood, but there's a piece of legal philosophy from the development of our kind of common law legal thought. And it's by a gentleman he was a lawyer in England in the 1500s called Thomas Hobbes. And he said, contracts without swords are meaningless. And what we've done in the last 500 years that Murray's talking about, that gentleman's talking about, is have a relationship that's been predicated upon trust, and there's been generally mutually goodwill. Although Western Canada was set up as a colony of Central Canada to support it, let's be honest about that, but we've grown up now, and we're not going to live the way that the world the rest of Canada is now defining for us. That's the little problem. And the challenge is that unless Canada recognizes that we are standing up, and that the actual sword that I'm using metaphorically is the credible reality of standing up and contending against this not just overreach, but a Marxist, technocratic, fascist agenda, then we will step out in order to liberate. And actually, you know what? Just in case there's any liberal leaders listening, that really is a call to confrontation, because this has been ignored for a long time, and we're not going to keep doing this the same way as we've done for the last 50 years, because the goodwill and intent behind the face in Ottawa is not there anymore. It's an agenda to steal, to kill, and to destroy what is a great group of people, and our nation, and our fellow Canadians.
Grant, can we have a coffee? And when you think we've had enough, you resume the microphone?
Well, I don't know. I'm guessing it's almost 3 o'clock, so maybe everybody's had enough. But let's have a coffee, and I'll stick around if for some conversations. Is there one more question? Go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment here. So I'm just going to read something. Rule of law is not being respected. Understand how powerful the United States are. Want to hold those in power accountable for not respecting the rule of law that was established. People in government need a system to keep each other in check. So those comments, in our minds, probably would come from a conservative background, right? I took a whole 3 pages of notes on where we're aligned. This was a Dalhousie conversation that just took place a couple weeks ago. Dalhousie is a liberal university in Eastern Canada. We are so much more aligned than we are apart. And the mainstream media, all of the different organizations that are out there that have ulterior motives underneath are keeping us separated. We are so much more aligned than we are different. So when we do the right versus left, we need to stop that, because that is what is keeping that alive. So we need to find a different way to communicate where it's about unity versus pointing fingers at right, left, because it just keeps us separated. And we literally are all afraid of the same thing. The names are just being called different things, fascist, Nazi, whatever. It's the same stuff.
And this is why I work and I'm careful to not talk about Alberta leaving. I think it's Alberta standing up to contend for the culture, values, and traditions of this great nation that are being subverted and stolen. And there is an element that is executing this threat against our nation. And part of it is the media that is creating the division that you're talking about. It absolutely is the case. And so that's why meetings like this are so important, because we actually have to have these conversations without having some issues kind of cordoned off that are too much of sacred cows or too politically explosive to actually talk about. Because the agenda that is coming here is exploding our understanding of who we are as a people. And I'm not okay with that. And I don't think the rest of my fellow Albertans are. And from what I've seen back and forth across this country, we're the only people in this nation right now that have the faith, the tenacity, the resiliency, the strength, and the resources to stand up and say no. And actually have that fight. But we've got to have the fight, because the agenda is rolling to undermine us, and everything is becoming illegal. And they've just, it looks like, when I was reading the news last night, it looks like they've just passed another bill that's allowing grandfathering of immigration, which means that if Canadians come here, get their citizenship for 3 years, and they go back to whatever country you want to pick, their children, even though they're born overseas, become Canadians, and so do their grandchildren. That's being passed. So this is why I read you the post from the State Department of how concerned the American government is about migration and sovereignty. We need to talk about this. We're not.
Yes, I just have a comment similar to what this lady is saying here. We've been sitting on the fence, and we can't be sitting on the fence anymore. We have to do what's morally right and stop letting these cracks come in that are unmoral. We can't be adding any more little cracks anymore, because that's what's destroying us. And vision, that this whole thing was done for centuries to divide us, if it's whatever, religion, whatever. We have to stay focused on what's right and go forward. And it's a total numbers game. So we can't get distracted and go down all these little rabbit holes, because that's exactly what they want.
Okay, last comment, then we'll take a break.
I just want to make this one comment, because this is something that will make maybe do the research. It's out there. Get motivated. Investigate. This fine fellow here. Investigate all of the political people. Investigate who is behind the contracts. Doug Ford just put out a piece saying that a Norwegian company it has this new big project. Who's it owned by? A Chinese outfit. It's not Norwegian. Do the digging. Do the research. Danielle Smith's ex-husband has a business importing people from India. That is what he does. He imports people from India and helping that. That's her ex-husband. Do the digging. The information is all out there, and then you can start to see who these people are that are hiding in plain sight.
Okay, let's take a break. Thank you, everyone. There's coffee and stuff at the back, and I'm happy to chat if anyone's interested. We'll reconvene to see what that looks like, that reconvening in about 15 minutes, if that suits, okay? Thank you. Thank you for all the online people as well. You want me to say this? Hi, everyone. Yeah, we're coming to a closed session here. We're going to end this live stream because there's some questions that I'm not convinced people really want to open up here in terms of the public, and we're getting real in terms of what's really going on in this country. I thank you for watching. I hope that you pass this along, subscribe, press like to my friend's channel here, and we need to keep talking about these issues and really get into the grid of what's going on. One of the questions that I think we're going to be talking about right now is the issue of the compatibility with Canadian culture, values, and traditions with militant Islam. And that's not a conversation you hear every day in political discussion, but it's something that I think I'm happy to begin to engage with. So thank you very much, and we'll cut the feed now.